Hello, fellow druids. I'm back for another episode, full circle. This one, I'm hoping isn't going to be too long because if it is, I'll be probably soapboxing for too much of it. But I want to have, and this was a topic brought to me by one of the viewers of the show, and I liked it, and I thought it was very important to discuss with a lot of CID changes and a lot of upcoming changes to Circle coming out. And the topic that they brought up was sort of the notion, and this has been something that has existed essentially throughout all of War Machine Hordes, and it's honestly it's not just this game. I think if you look out there at any competitively played game, you will see some of this, and that's the notion of this is the best and only way to play a given faction. And obviously, we're talking about Circle, so the best and only way to play Circle. You saw a lot of this in Mark II. I didn't play Mark I. I'm assuming there was some of it then. You certainly still see it now. If you look at live, like what's being played live for Circle, it's essentially, you know, you got to play Kruger II and Bradigus and Bones is kind of the prevailing thing. And even from there, there's only a few casters that are branched out, and the lists are actually not that varied even on top of that. And that's fine. So I've also talked about, I've had an episode where I talked about, you know, that you don't have to be a special snowflake in every regard and have to play unique lists, and that's still true. But don't necessarily get locked in, especially as you're looking at CID stuff, because as it starts rolling out, there's going to start to, on social media and tournament lists, you're going to start seeing a lot of probably similar lists, right? If you look at, say, Legion or Khador, or Protectorate, who both all recently kind of went through CIDs, you're already starting to see this, and that's fine to a degree, right? If those lists are working for people, they're having fun, great. But on the other hand, don't assume that those are the only lists, because until somebody started playing that, or a few somebodies, it wasn't a list at all. I mean, there's a lot of things that people talk about being a terrible idea until they're not. Ghost Fleet, for example, when that theme was announced in Mark III back about a year and a half ago now, most people looked at it and were like, this is terrible. Why would you play this? These Ghost Pirates have such bad stats. They're overpriced. They're terrible models, blah, 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 blah. And this kept going, and then there was some brief talk from Pagani. There was some, and then Banky kind of started playing it, and a couple other people talked a little bit lightly about it, and suddenly Ghost Fleet is this broken list, right, that is so powerful that it actually needs to be nerfed. And the point there is, you know, and now people are going to look back and be like, oh, it was really obvious that was such a strong list. That's not true. That is not what people were saying at the time. Not at all. I mean, there were a few people, definitely, but the overwhelming majority of players, at least initially, looked at that and scoffed and moved on. And Crix was considered to be a bad faction kind of at the time too. So like this sort of, the reason you're dealing with Crix as one of the problems you are now is probably partially because it started on an upswing with Ghost Fleet. So the point being there is, don't get locked into assuming that just because somebody says this is the only way to build this caster, or this is the only caster pair in Circle. And I'm already hearing this, right? Like, there are plenty of people in Circle who have somewhat adamantly insisted that Kruger II has an infinite place in Circle's competitive pairing. That you are insane if you play anything other than Kruger II and something that pairs with Kruger II. Don't get me wrong, Kruger II is a very strong caster. Kruger II Bones specifically is what people are saying too. Don't get me wrong, Kruger II is a very strong caster. He has a lot of tools, and as long as there are scenarios being played in this game, he's going to have a place in it where he is worthy of consideration, barring any substantial nerfs or anything like that. But he is not so strong that there aren't other things that you couldn't consider playing. Bones with him isn't so strong that you shouldn't experiment and try other lists with him. other pairings, you know, etc. Just because the common wisdom seems to be you must play Kruger too, does not mean that that's what you have to do. Does not mean there aren't benefits to not doing that, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't explore things, because, you know, caster pairings evolve from people finding new things that work, or things that solve problems that are currently in the meta better. And even just to give some comparison to that, Kruger 2 hasn't changed throughout all of Mark 3. Theme Forces now exists, and that changed, but Kruger himself has not changed in the entirety of Mark 3. So, and the reason I mention that is just that if you were to go look at early Mark 3, no one was playing Kruger. They were playing Wormwood, largely. They were playing things like Una 2, Tanith until Una got nerfed, Tanith until Una 2 came out. And then there's sort of a lull, and I couldn't really tell you what was being played, and then sort of Bones List took over. So, like, Mark 3 came out in June of 2016, so that we've covered that much, like, so for at least a year. And Kruger saw a little bit of play in there, don't get me wrong, but he was not heralded as this you must play him caster that he is now. There was a lot of other things that people felt that was true for, and that has to do, a few of them have to do with nerfs, a lot of it has to do with meta changing though, right? Like Kara Sloan was a very commonly played caster at that time. The Wolves were in a different place, and you know, you were considered sort of at a liability playing someone like Kruger who could get outranged by the attacks. The Steamroller changed as well. Steamroller could change again. It probably will at some point. I don't know if it'll be major changes, but it'll probably change at some point. Also, champions is a thing, right? Look at your champions pairings and see what's available there, because that's going to make a big difference too. But basically, the point that I'm getting at here is you want to use, especially this time, I would say basically from now until the end of the year. I mean, I don't know when the document will be posted for CID changes, but even once that's posted, there's going to be some experimenting, and like there'll probably be some things in that document that are a little different than where we ended up, or things we didn't anticipate. And we should be using that time to try, and that doesn't mean if you think that you're starting to be on, you know, if you have a list that you think is starting to work for you, that's starting to jive, I'm not necessarily saying stop playing that to try out more things. More what I'm saying is, if you feel like you're onto something, but online you're seeing people say like, well, you can only play Iona with 2 units of Ravagers, but you're having success with 2 units of Wolf Riders, let's say, you know, or you know, I think, you know, if the online theory seems to be like, well, you have to pair Kruger 2 with whatever this is, like try pairing it with other stuff and see what happens. I've read in some on the War Machine Discord several people who are very negative about Call of the Wild. Don't listen to that. Try Call of the Wild lists. Try, you know, possibly try them with things you wouldn't expect. Like I said, right now Kruger 2 is very good in Bones, but that doesn't mean you couldn't play him in Devourer's Host or in Call of the Wild. You know, there's some casters like Baldur 2, Baldur 1, both you sort of think thematically they should be with Bones casters, or they should be Bones casters because of sort of the fluff around them. But give them a try with Devourer's Host, or possibly something like Call of the Wild or whatever, and see how that plays. Similarly, you know, this has not been something I've enjoyed, but I know some people have felt like Bones lists with Chromac 1 might be good. Certainly still worth trying, right? And look at rules that even people didn't really, in the CID specifically, like, and we'll probably have episodes talking about some of these, but look at things where people sort of dismissed changes to things, right? Like, I'll use a couple examples that I'm thinking of, right? Like, so the Well of Orboros has this hyper-aggressive rule, and everybody's kind of scoffed at that, and maybe it is bad. I don't even personally think that it's that great of a rule in general either, but maybe try out some lists where you can use it and see if you get any traction out of it, or if it matters. Or a couple that I did, like I played Chromac 2 in Devourer's Host. mostly because I wanted to see what happens when he had easy access to corpses, and you could give him Divine Inspiration from the Blood Shaman. And I mean, locally it worked. I don't know if it's I don't know if that's exactly the type of Chromac 2 that I'm gonna ultimately end up playing, but it was interesting. You know, Chromac 1 hasn't really got a lot of attention in Devourer's House. Try that out. Things that I'm not even thinking of saying in this podcast. Try it out. Video, whatever I'm doing. But don't let the forums dictate what you know, just because they say this is the best, that does not mean that's true. Just because they say the only, you know, right now even they're saying the only pairing to play is Kruger 2 and Bradigus. And don't get me wrong, there's some strength there. The last tournament I went to, I played Kruger 1 and Kaya 3. And I went 4-0. So, and I wouldn't necessarily say either of those were absolutely optimal lists. I mean, I think the Kruger 1 list was optimal given the rules that are in play. But, you know, I'm not saying that I didn't have any holes in my pairing. I'm not saying that it was absolutely the most optimal way to play. But that doesn't mean that just because what you see online is the only way to play, especially if you're not having fun doing it. And that was kind of why I switched it up. But try things out. That it's still ultimately a game as well. And unless you have, most people are not going to have aspirations to win every convention little tournament they go to. Most people are not going to be going to the WTC, and that's fine. If you are, you know, maybe you have to sacrifice some of the. And I still probably wouldn't ultimately sacrifice all of your positive enjoyment of the game just to play what you think is the strongest list, because I don't think you're not going to want to play them as much, which is going to affect ultimately your performance with them, because the way to get better at the game is to take the tools that you have in your list and figure out how to play into more things with that, more so than it is going, I have this list, you have this list, I win or I lose. That's not how the game works. So, so yeah, I think we'll leave it there. I think my point has been hammered into the ground, and all of the dead horses have been looked in the mouth, as my sister-in-law might say. And and yeah, so we'll call it there. So, but again, as you're trying things, I would love to hear about it. I would certainly I'll be talking about, I don't know, it's already Wednesday of this week as I'm recording, so I don't know that I'll have more for this week, but as the weeks go on, I'm planning to dig into some list ideas, into some, you know, some various different ideas in Devourer's Host and Call of the Wild and different casters and different things and so forth, and trying to find what that is for me. So I'll certainly be talking about it. And you're welcome to try out my things, and if you think that I'm crazy and you know you want to try something else, you should try something else. So as always, thanks for watching. The links are below to start any of the conversations you'd like, and we'll see you next time.